Hello, my name is Julia Washburn, and in this video I will be critically examining a NASM blog post that was written by a doctor and is considered credible, but has some things that should be looked a little bit closer if it is going to be used as a credible source for research purposes or anything for that matter. So from the source, the article is called, "Is Sugar Really Bad for You? Yes and No. Here's Why," and it is by NASM Brad Dieter. So I chose a few different quotes that I thought I could speak on a little bit. The first one was from the NASM blog post was, "High sugar intake is widely known as being associated with heart disease, cancer, and diabetes. However, this information needs to be interpreted with a bit of caution. People who consume large amounts of sugar also tend to have a cluster of other unhealthy behaviors that are associated with heart disease, such as drinking, smoking, being overweight, low physical activity, and high blood pressure." So with that statement from the blog post, I think it is a little bit of a tricky one because it can be a little bit misleading. There isn't any direct proof that if you have a combination of all of these different factors plus the high intake of sugar, that that's what's directly causing heart disease. So I think that this can be misleading to people, that it sounds like as long as they are disciplined in these other factors of their life, such as they don't drink very much, they don't smoke, they tend to work out, or they have a healthier diet, that they are permitted to have a high intake of sugar. And so this can be misleading because that is not an accurate statement. So I chose from the article called "Added Sugar Intake in Cardiovascular Diseases, Mortality Among U.S. Adults." Authors state that consumption of added sugar, including all sugars added in processing or preparing foods, among Americans aged 2 years or older, increased from an average of 235 calories per day to 318 calories within 20 years. So this change was mainly attributed to the increased consumption of sugar-sweetened beverages. This is by Yang in 2014, paragraph 7. This is a prime example of people who have a regular, healthy diet and lifestyle habits who begin to consume more sugar than they were before, and this began to lead to higher increased rates of cardiovascular disease among the population. And then from the same article called "Is Sugar Bad for You?" The "Is Sugar Really Bad for You? Yes and No. Here's Why." I chose another quote from that article that could be misconstrued or misleading to those who don't have as much of a knowledge towards these things. So my second quote that I chose was, "Much of the deep science we know about sugar and heart disease comes from experiments we have done on rodents and non-human primates. For example, mice and monkeys." I believe that this came off as misleading because it turns the attention away from the negative effects of high sugar intake, the negative effects that sugar has on humans based on the hundreds of thousands of studies done, to the negative effect it has on certain rodents that have been tested. Although it is important to include these studies within the research, it should not come off as a main point to argue because it turns the focus to different reasons sugar can be unhealthy. Another point from this argumentative sentence was the deep science put into quotation marks. This term can mean a lot of different things, and it can be misconstrued to excuse me, to mean something that it does not. In research studies, it is important to describe where all factual information is coming from, and I believe that this author used a very broad term by saying deep science instead of directly referring to a specific study or group of studies. And so this alone told me that this shouldn't be a super credible source to use for research purposes, or even a source to provide to one of my clients to help them continue growing outside of our training. So I found a quote from the article, Added Sugar Intake and Cardiovascular Disease Mortality Among U.S. Adults. I found that they provide very factual information about high sugar intake, and they quoted, we observed a significant relation between added sugar consumption and increased risk for cardiovascular disease mortality. So this, I believe, proves that the information given in the NASM blog post was not as credible as it should have been, especially from such a credible source, and something that is written by someone who has taken a doctorate program, somebody who's taken a master's program. I think it should be a little bit more credible, especially if we're going to use it for research purposes. So in complete thought, I think that the information given through the NASM blog post is not completely false if it is read by someone who is very knowledgeable about how sugar and insulin and all of that work within the body, and how calories work and things like that. But for someone who doesn't know a lot about this particular subject, I think that this article is way too broad and should have a lot more specific detail in it. Each of these researchers' points comes with exceptions, such as most of these studies show no real effect of moderate to above average sugar intake when the sugar intake is consumed in the context of a normal calorie intake. So this can be very misleading because most Americans consume more calories than they should due to the lack of knowledge of how many calories they should be consuming, and this leads to a high sugar intake all at the same time. So I think that this assignment was very helpful in the way that it shows that not every source that is peer-reviewed and done by a credible author or writer should be looked at with a close eye and still really considered. With like everything that is said should really be looked at and taken into consideration, and possibly, if you are able to, even checked through with your professor at the same time. So yeah, thank you very much.